You're listening to Cards to the Moon, a podcast about trading cards from both a collector and investor perspective. We hope you'll stick around for the ride as we take a deep dive into the state of the hobby, share some hot takes, hopefully some useful advice, and fun stories along the way. Hey guys, welcome back to the Cards to the Moon podcast. My name is Clark from 5cardguys.com and 5cardguys on Instagram. I'm recording the intro solo today for this Friday episode, but we do have a special guest interview that will play in just a bit. His name is Shane Norton, aka Sports Card Nobody on Instagram, and he's a big-time wrestling card collector. So if you're into wrestling cards, I think you'll really enjoy this episode. And if you don't know anything about wrestling cards like me before this interview, I think you'll learn a lot from Shane. We talk about the history of wrestling cards and all the way to what's popular today. Oh, and if you're going to the National later this month, Shane, along with others, is hosting a get-together on the Friday of that National week for wrestling card collectors, which is invite only, but it's real easy to get on the list, which he talks about in the interview. So stay tuned for that. But before we start the interview, I'm just going to announce the winner of our 2023 Top Series 2 Hanger Box contest that we announced only on this podcast just a couple weeks ago. And the winner is Andrew Harvey. Congratulations, Andrew. We'll reach out to you on Instagram and we'll get it to you as soon as possible. And thanks to all of you who DM'd us on Instagram at Cards to the Moon to enter and for being a loyal listener of the pod. We'll do some more giveaways in the future, so don't worry if you did not win this time around. Okay, with that, let's play the interview with Shane Norton, where he gives a thorough primer on wrestling cards. Enjoy. All right, we have another special guest on today's podcast episode. His name is Shane Norton, and you can find him on Instagram at SportsCardNobody. And if you're now on Instagram Threads, you can find him there too with the same handle. That's where I actually found out that Shane is really into wrestling cards, which is why I wanted him to come on the show. Because truthfully, I know very little about wrestling cards, although I personally grew up watching WWE. Well, I think it was called WWF back then, when the stars were Hulk Hogan, Randy Macho Man Savage, and the Iron Sheik, just to name a few. But I know, like sports cards, there's a wide variety of wrestling cards dating back all the way to the 1980s. So I'm hoping Shane will guide us through what's out there, what to look for, and just kind of give us a primer, so to speak, on wrestling cards in general. So without further ado, Shane, welcome to the podcast.
Oh, Clark, thank you so much, man. Before we get into anything, not to just sit here and kiss your butts, but there's a lot of hobby content out there. There's a ton of us all making podcasts and YouTube channels. And over the last couple of years, as I've sort of taken a deep dive into hobby content, at one point I had 100 things I was listening to, and I've cut that way down, and your guys' show is still one of them that I enjoy listening to. I really love what you guys are bringing to this space, man. So awesome job. And yeah, super stoked to come on here and talk some wrestling, man. Let's do it.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Shane. I really appreciate that. And I know there's a lot of podcasts out there. And we actually always say on our podcast, we love the more content that's out there, the better for the hobby. So
100%.
So all power to the people trying to create new hobby content like yourself. Well, we'll get into that too in a bit. But before we dive into the world of wrestling cards, which I'm actually eager to learn about, do you want to share your story of how you got into the hobby in general? And yeah, where's your hobby story begin?
Yeah, so, I have a super unique story in that I collected when I was a kid, and then I stopped, and then I came back. I'm just kidding. I think that's every one of us since the pandemic, right? Yeah. So yeah, that was me, man. When I was a kid, I collected everything. I collected Ninja Turtles cards. I remember me and my friends was like begging our parents for like 50 cents or whatever it was, like over and over, so we can keep going to the local corner store to pick up Ninja Turtle cards because you could like build the puzzle when you put it all together. I mean, we were just just nuts over that. And then as I got a little bit older into like elementary school, it was baseball cards, it was football cards, Marvel cards. I was such a big Marvel collector. Mm-hmm. I was super close to completing the, I think it's 1994 Skybox. Might have been even like 1993. But that was the set where when you put them inside of the 9-page binders, it would make one big poster, basically.
Oh, yeah.
And I loved collecting that.
That's
and then
cool.
It got stolen from me. I don't know what happened to that whole set, so I never finished it. But yeah, fast forward, get a little bit older. Kind of fell out of it for whatever reason. High school is probably when it really started to fall off into college. But then I'll try to make this story short and sweet. But in 2018, I was finally marrying my now wife. We'd been together forever. We were engaged for a couple of years, finally getting married. And for a wedding gift, we had said we weren't going to really do wedding gifts. So I decided to get her tickets to we were living in Los Angeles at the time, and the Packers, she's a Packers fan, were coming out to play the Rams. So I decided to pick up a set of tickets for her because she had never been to a game. So I buy those, and then the morning of my wedding, I was sort of like, I hadn't come up with a way to present them because I didn't have the physical tickets yet. They weren't out. You could buy the tickets. I bought them from a season ticket holder or whatever. So I was trying to come up with a way to present this to my wife. And I just got this like silly idea. I ran to a Target that morning. And I picked up a whole bunch of football cards. I think they were score cards. Yeah, they were score cards. And I went up to the customer service desk, and I go up to the woman who's there, and I say, hey, so I'm looking for 2 cards. It was Aaron Rodgers and Todd Gurley at the time. I didn't, I was like, I'm just looking for 2 cards out of these sets. Is it okay if I just like open these, and then whenever I open, I'll pay for and put the rest back? And she's looking at me like, no, we can't. Okay. What are you talking about? I was like, no, listen, I'm going to pay for everything I open, but I really, and she's like, all right. I'm getting married. I start to explain that. And then she hears, the wedding things. She gets her boss to come over and they're like, yeah, let's do this. So then these 2 women are like helping me rip open all these packs, just looking for those cards. And finally, I don't know however many we ripped, found the two guys that I was looking for, paid for, maybe it was like 15 packs or whatever it was. This was a lot easier to get packs then, although we're in a good spot now. You can go to Target and get cards now again.
True.
But, so I got those 2 cards. They made like a nice little letter or whatever, and that's how I presented the gift. We get married. The wedding's amazing. Love the whole day. But after that, I had these cards still. She didn't really want them. And Todd Gurley was like the MVP of me winning fantasy football, I think 1 or 2 years prior. So I was like, I'm going to keep this. That's kind of cool. And then I was like, well, then Christian McCaffrey was a big deal for my, as part of the three-peat. And then David Johnson's the guy who started the 3. I should get all of their cards, right? Little by little, I got these cheap little like $2 cards or whatever off eBay. It's like, then I realized, wait, there's better versions. There's auto patch versions. And that just opened up the floodgates a little bit. But it was really, I was still only dabbling until the pandemic, like everybody else. And then I went full bore at that point. And here I am.
Yeah. No, that's I appreciate that background in that story too, with your wedding and everything. That definitely adds some color to how it all began. All right, so let's get into wrestling now. As a newbie wrestling card collector myself, can you start with a little bit of the history of wrestling cards? And like for sports cards, I would talk about how Topps dominated the industry, and then Panini and Leaf and Upper Deck became competitors later on. I wonder if there's like a similar story there for wrestling cards, and fast forward to where we are now. Can you tell us what brands are popular today? Yeah, well, so if you're really looking into like vintage wrestling, the history of it is actually kind of sporadic. There wasn't like a major Topps company that ran with it for years and years and years, like in baseball. They're still having that license. However, was it like 70 years later, whatever it is they're up to? Right. Yeah. The real set that kind of is considered, like the 52 Topps is the 1982-83 Wrestling All Stars. It's called. This was a set that you could get out of a magazine. The print runs are a little sketchy about how many they were actually made. There's a lot of questions about it, but this set came out and it included all of the major stars at the time. It's what's considered Hulk Hogan's rookie card. There is some debate there, especially some, there's some cards from Japan. There's some cards that came out of like wrestling figures. So there's some debate there, but nonetheless, if you ask
any standard wrestling collector, what is Hulk Hogan's rookie card? It's the Wrestling All-Stars, the 82-83 All-Stars.
Is that the yellow background?
Yeah, it's got like that. Yeah, that border on. So not just the background, actually, because you might be talking about the Topps 87, I think, is the year that a lot of people will also talk about as rookie card as a debate. And there's two versions of it, one with a yellow background and one with a blue background. So there's some debate because that one's actually Topps, right? Now you're into an actual, licensed brand name. So some people will argue that that's the card, but for the most part, it's the 82-83 All-Stars. And what's cool about that set is it looks like what you and I look like right now on the interview, right? It's like a portrait of just our heads. There's like a little wavy banner on the top of it. And it's kind of some people will say a bland design, but it's nice because it's just featuring the guys all big and prominent. And it's got a lot of major stars from the era. Andre the Giant's in there. I mean, a lot of the major guys that really helped kick this off. So that's really what people consider the vintage set. If you're a vintage wrestling collector, a lot of people collect that. Especially the big thing is people not only collecting those, but collecting autographs. Obviously these are all in-person autographs. It was, everything's done after the fact. And that gets really interesting when you look at like the PSA registries. I'll try not to get into this too much because there's a lot of drama between the folks that collect these cards and like they're super competitive. David Peck is a name that comes up a lot. He was like one of the first collectors to really start putting Wrestling All-Stars out there as a brand, a set that people need to collect. He was way ahead of the curve. And then, however many years ago, I mean, over a decade ago, I think he was pushing this, maybe even more. He had gotten featured in, I think, Beckett Magazine at one point because of him being so ahead of the curve on this. But now that is known as like the set and the competition is fierce. I mean, guys have cards that they refuse to sell. They have cards that multiple copies of them that they really hold on to. And the folks chasing down all the autographs is interesting because, a lot of these wrestlers have passed. So it's hard to find some of these autographs, and people that have put together incredible PSA registries, the competitions that go on there again. And sometimes on Twitter, it's like we're in the wrestling ring sometimes, but that's kind of the long and the short that is kind of what's known as like the main vintage set. There are even older cards you can find from the 30s and things of that nature, but that's kind of where you really would kick off. Okay, this is when wrestling kind of started in a semi-mainstream way as it evolved over time.
Understood.
Yeah. And then after that, you do get to like the 1987 Topps, and that's where people will somewhat make the argument that should be Hulk Hogan's rookie card. But that's when you have your first WWF licensed product. It was WWF at the time. It's WWE now. So that's kind of why people really like, well, I mean, that should be it, but whatever. That's a really fun set. Bret Hart's rookie card is in there. I've got one of those. I'm a Bret Hart super collector. And then from there, there's a lot of changes that happen through wrestling throughout the years. Different companies that have had the licenses, including like Comics Images, WCW had sets. And it kind of goes up and down. And we didn't really hit like a really clean, like linear line with that until Topps got the license back around. Man, I don't want to get this wrong. People are gonna pick me apart on this, but they started to get the license around. I'm gonna have to recheck into that. I know they lost the license just a couple years ago because Panini took it. But they were creating, so we had 2014 Topps Chrome was the first year of actual Topps Chrome, but they had done Topps Heritage in years prior where you'd seen some Topps Chrome cards as well.
Right.
But they also had the 1998 WCW license Topps did, and that's when you really had your first actual Topps Chrome cards in there. But then they ended up with the WWF license, and they started making the Heritage. I think around 2015 Topps Heritage came out, but 2014 Topps Chrome is a very sought after set. When it comes to modern-ish collecting,
2014.
2014 Topps Chrome is known as one of the most sought after sets. The 1998 WCW NWO set, though, they had an autograph insert. They basically had all of the major wrestlers. Bret Hart's in there. Hollywood Hulk Hogan at the time, Goldberg, Mr. Perfect. I mean, so many huge wrestlers at the time signed these cards. It's a clean design. They're all horizontal. And that is also one of the most sought after sets. People collect those and try to collect that, and have built incredible sets of that over the years. So like I typically will look at the Wrestling All-Stars as like the most vintage sought after set, probably the preeminent set in wrestling. Then 1998 WCW NWO, the autograph inserts is way up there. 2014 Topps Chrome has a very special place. And then as we start to get to more recent, so Topps had the license all the way through 2021. Panini took it over. And this is where we hit a little bit of an inflection point, because we got our very first Prism wrestling cards. And that, in 2022 is when that set came out. And that was wild. I mean, I'm sure even folks that don't collect wrestling are aware of what happened. That set came out. Boxes were, I think, originally around like $800. They were hitting like $1,600 quickly. Cards were flying off the shelf for just absurd prices. And it was exciting because it was great to see wrestling really get a time in the sun. But then there was just a dramatic crash. I mean, I think you might even still be able to buy boxes for around $400 for like half of what they were originally going for. I haven't looked at them recently, so I might be off a little bit, but right around that price, they crashed down to pretty hard. But the exciting thing is The Rock's 1-of-1 Black Prism from that set just set an all-time high for wrestling cards, selling at $125,000.
Yeah.
So while the set is going to be remembered a little polarizing for the crazy hype in the skyrocket that it saw immediately followed by the crash, the cards hold those value. I mean, a Bret Hart 1-of-1 just sold for like $9K. Those cards are still the Prism collectors want those cards, just like in other sports. Yeah. And that's where we are now. Panini still has a license, although it was already, as soon as they got the license, I think even before Prism dropped, it was announced that Fanatics was going to be getting the license within a few years, which means it'll be going back to Topps. And we'll see what happens there. I mean, for all we know, by the time that happens, Panini could be a Fanatics brand too. So we'll see.
Right. Yeah. Oh, well, I really appreciate that. That's really well said, and all in a nutshell. I need someone. I need someone to do the same what you did with me here for Pokemon cards. So that I'm gonna look for that person next. But no,
I might have a guy I can send you. I got a guy who's actually collecting the entire first set, and he's trying to get them all in PSA 7s. And he did recently, within the last couple of months, finally got the Charizard, which obviously that's the hardest one to get. So he's trying to build the entire set in PSA 7. So he might be able to help you out. Maybe I'll send him your way.
All right. Yeah, please do. All right. I had another question about the popularity of wrestling cards. But before I do that, how did you get into wrestling cards? Like you were talking about when you were talking about your wedding story, we're talking about football cards, so we know you're into that. But like, were you into wrestling as a kid and you got into it around that time, or was that later on during the pandemic as well?
So wrestling itself, I don't remember life not being a diehard wrestling fan. I don't remember not being in love with Hulkamania. I remember when he lost to Ultimate Warrior at WrestleMania, I was heartbroken. I was like, this is crazy. But then I became an Ultimate Warrior fan, right? And I still to this day remember, I forget exactly which year it was now, but I was like maybe 8 years old or something like that. But there was a segment where The Undertaker and the Ultimate Warrior were facing off in a segment, by a casket. And The Undertaker throws The Undertaker in there and he locks it. And Roddy Piper's announcing, they're screaming he can't breathe, and they're trying to break him out as they cut the break. And I remember sitting there as a kid thinking, oh my God, he can't breathe. They got to get him out. And my mom looked at me and go, it's all fake. And that was the moment. That was the moment where I was like, it was broken to me that wrestling is a work. Yeah. So my entire life, though, I had been a wrestling fan. I fell off a little bit because it was kind of hard to keep up when I hit a certain age. It was hard to watch pay-per-views. And then in the late 90s, when it hit its peak again with the NWO specifically, I became, I was like, this is just as amazing as I remember. And I've been a fan my entire life. Bret Hart is my all-time favorite wrestler. I'm wearing a Bret Hart t-shirt right now. I super collect his stuff. So all of that is to say, like, I've always been a wrestling fan, diehard. I think it's the most unique, just type of entertainment that exists. There's nothing else like it. And wrestling cards started to enter my sphere about a year and a half to almost 2 years ago now. So I knew that they existed, but I didn't realize that they were like legit, I guess, right? But because of folks like you and other content creators were getting exposed to so many different things, I had started to hear other people talk about wrestling cards, including Brett McGrath from Stacking Slabs. I discovered Worlds Collide, which is a really wonderful podcast featuring Tony Vella and Zan Morning. And I started to realize, wait, this wrestling card, like there's actually like really nice wrestling cards out there. And that immediately got me going to what is Bret Hart's rookie card? Boom, 1987 Topps. I found a raw copy that I still have. I bought one of those, and that started to open up the floodgates. But what really cemented it for me is I went to a card show. And this is why, man, I encourage people to do two things in this hobby. One is, if you can, create content, even if it's just sharing stuff on Instagram, on Twitter, on Threads, whatever it might be, and get out to shows. Get out and just see what's out there, because you're going to get exposed to things that you didn't realize. So I went out to this show called the EC3 show here in Connecticut, where I live. It's a show that's put on by a guy that's become a friend of mine, actually, but his very first show I went out, and I had come across a dealer that I actually kind of knew. He's a local dealer. Ideal Sports Cards is the name of his shop. And I was just chatting with him, and I looked down, and he had some really cool wrestling cards in there. And I had actually just lost a bet to two of my buddies, and I had to buy them each. We decided to be a wrestling card for about $20. So I'm looking through what he's got, and he had this 2020 Topps Finest set, or several of them, including Bret Hart, The Rock, Stone Cold, Triple H, Undertaker, and John Cena, I believe. And he had these all in gold. So I'm looking at these things going, holy moly, these are phenomenal. And I said, how much? I'm buying, and I bought every one of them. And I fell in love with that set specifically for a long time. Like, this set is so pretty. I mean, you're aware of Topps Finest from baseball, I'm sure. Sure. So seeing this set in person, I was just like hooked. And that really sent me down the rabbit hole, really started to educate myself, really started to like find who I was. And it started to, I was just on a show, a collab that I do with these guys, Cousin Collectibles, called The Faction last night. And we were just talking about this. You know, they asked me how I feel now in my collecting, and things have changed over the last 2 years. And I said, I'm super happy. I really do believe I have one of the best Bret Hart collections, at least in the public sphere, out there. I've really built something special that I'm super proud to have. But I started to feel a little bit hollow because I'm neglecting baseball cards. I'm a Mookie guy. I'm a huge Dodgers fan. And I haven't bought a Mookie Betts card in a long time. I'm a huge Lakers fan. I'm a huge 49ers fan. You know, I think Fred Warner just got he's being touted as the best linebacker in football. I don't have a Fred Warner card. Now, I get we don't love defensive, cards in this hobby space, but nonetheless, give me a Fred Warner card, and yet I don't have one. So it's sort of pros and cons there that wrestling has become my main focus, but I still feel a little bit of that, like I need more Clayton Kershaw cards.
Yeah. Nice. Okay. Well, you mentioned, I guess you really started collecting wrestling cards about a couple of years ago, but even since that short period, would you say the popularity of wrestling cards have grown over time? Like, if you go to a local card show, do you see more booths with them, or less? So 100% popularity has risen. And I know that, we all know that for a few reasons. I mean, prices have gone up. There's even, I think on Stacking Slabs, he was talking about recently, the card ladder indexes and whatnot, and most things are down, right? And that's not a shock. We can't maintain where we were over the last couple of years. There's no surprise about that. Right. But wrestling still continues to show trends in the upward space. We just saw the highest wrestling card sale of all time in The Rock. That Rock 1-of-1 Prism broke records. Yep. We've seen multiple 5-figure sales. We've seen a lot of money going into this space. So clearly it's opened up to people that are not just niche collectors. There's people out there that have got deeper pockets than I have that are buying cards that I can only dream about, right? On top of that, last year at the National, it was my first National in Atlantic City, and I walked the entire floor for like 4 or 5 days. I was there every single day. And there was maybe, I don't want to exaggerate, maybe 5 or 6 booths that actually had a wrestling presence.
One of them was the Great Curator. Most people know who he is. One of them is Prison God, and he had a couple monster PSA 10s that I was really jealous about. And there was a couple other booths as well. Now, you could see other people who had some, but it was always a really old Andre the Giant card, which is really cool, but that was kind of it, or Hulk Hogan stuff. But you weren't seeing a variety. At that National, one of the last days, I had heard that there was an F1 event that happened at some hotel. And I left the National, I got home, and I did my reviews about it, and that was my thing. It's a little bit of a bummer how little wrestling there really was. It was cool. There was a wrestling panel, though. There was a panel of people talking about wrestling cards who are even way more educated than I am, like by far. So seeing them go up there and getting a chat with them was phenomenal. But fast forward, so I started to think, like, okay, what can we do to have some sort of a better wrestling presence at the National? Well, a lot of those folks that were on that panel, myself and others, are actually going to be doing a wrestling event on that Friday at the Hyatt Regency. We're calling it the main event, and we're getting it's an invite-only event. Basically, you just have to you have to send an email to Chicago Main Event 2023 at gmail.com. Just say, hey, I want to be there, and you're going to get on the invite list. But we're getting a huge response. I mean, we're tracking to do more than I thought we could do a year ago. I mean, and that's pretty telling, right? The fact that we're able to host this event at, in Chicago at that time and getting a really good positive turnout is incredible. We're seeing the energy. We're seeing how people are responding to this, and people are realizing that there is legitimacy to these cards. And you can define legitimacy any way you want, right? I get that there's a lot of people that just are looking to make money in this hobby, and I get it. We need that. We do need that to keep the hobby thriving. So people want to buy cards and look for ways to invest, and I get it. And they're seeing that there is ways to do that. But as a straight collector, I'm just seeing so many other collectors with just incredible enthusiasm, and we're all going to get together at this event, and we're going to talk about our nerddom of wrestling, and it's going to be amazing. So the popularity is absolutely rising. It's not going to ever be, rookie quarterback hype level, but nonetheless, there's a very hungry fan base, and we're seeing that.
Yeah, no, that's really good to hear. And we know, like, wrestling fans are passionate fans. So that's always good for the wrestling card, community, because you always have that at least built-in demand there.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting when you say that, though, is that is 100% true. But one of the questions that long-term collectors have had, so even excluding myself, but that I've learned, is it's funny how many wrestling collectors are out there just like spending, I don't know, endless amounts of money on t-shirts, on action figures, and on even like championship belts, but not cards. Okay, So it's always been it was weird to like, you'd see this, there is like really people who spend a lot of money on wrestling memorabilia and wrestling collectibles, but that money wasn't flowing into cards per se. I think we're starting to see more of that. I think we're starting to see more collectors open up to what it is they want to, I always use it, the self-expression, right? To express themselves and their passion in this way versus the signed boots or whatever it might be, and I'm not knocking that stuff at all, but it's fascinating how many people will spend a lot of money to collect wrestling, but not cards. And maybe that's starting to turn a little bit.
Yeah, maybe it just needs more time. Like, baseball cards obviously has a longer history, but a lot of people just collected signed autographed baseballs or other forms of memorabilia as well. So we'll see. We'll see how that plays out. You did mention, there are collectors or even like people in the hobby that just want to buy wrestling cards to flip as an investor. And I was wondering if you could just kind of spend a little bit of time on that, where if people wanted to do that, if hobbyists wanted to do that, what should they be looking for? Like in sports cards, it's easy. You could say you probably want to look at someone's rookie cards first, probably. Then you can be more specific with like on-card autographs are usually more desired. Serial numbered cards, that have scarcity. I was wondering if it's the same for wrestling cards, or are there other factors that come into play that might add to the card's monetary value?
So It does follow a similar pattern for sure. Scarcity matters.
Okay.
Rare and scarce cards are the ones that command the most money. That's why in the Wrestling All-Star set, people are really trying to track down, obviously, again, they're in-person autographs on that set and build out those sets, right? Because they're so much harder to get than a raw version. And that also, that whole set becomes very grade dependent. Trying to find a PSA 10 is like, good luck. I mean, it's an old set, came out of you had to like order through a magazine. I mean, nobody had any idea they'd be worth anything for all these years. And there's questions about how many there are, but so that grade or that set does become very grade dependent. And of course when you get to more modern eras, you've definitely run into the same thing in the other sets where numbered cards, parallels that are harder to find hold more value. So if you want a Rock card, he doesn't have too many versus some others. Actually, if you can get a 1/1 prism, obviously that means something. Or if you can get a gold numbered to 10, that is where it's going to be. But of course, getting those initially, there's always that built-in cost for someone like the Rock. So you can try to prospect, but prospecting in wrestling is weird. There is a never-ending debate in the wrestling world, and this is true in some other sports as well, a true rookie or whatever. But in wrestling, it gets so convoluted because, like, let's look at someone like Bray Wyatt. Bray Wyatt is he's currently Bray Wyatt again, but he was the Fiend, and then he was Bray Wyatt with the Wyatt family, and then he's Bray Wyatt. Like, these characters, these gimmick changes. So what's the actual rookie card? Is it when he became the Fiend, if you want a Fiend card? So you start to have these like really big debates. And then it is super common in the wrestling world that a lot of wrestlers will come up through the independents, and the independents will make their own cards. So if you go after some of these guys, if you want like an MJF, are you going after, I think it's Limitless is the set that his like first independent card came in. Is that his rookie card? Or is it the Upper Deck one? They did the first AEW set, back in 2021, I think is when that set finally came out. These debates are like very, very deep, and they happen endlessly in the wrestling world. But you can still try to do that. If somebody was picking up Roman Reigns cards 10 years ago when his popularity, when he was getting booed, when he was the champion, they're pushing him as the biggest baby face in the company. If you were picking up his cards then, you probably had a good chance to get them a little bit cheaper. But now he is literally the hottest act in wrestling maybe even the last 10 years. Maybe, it's the whole thing that they're doing, the Bloodline storyline, it is just like taking over the wrestling airwaves. So now if you had any of his cards, from when he was in the Shield, you probably got a good chance to flip those now. So you can play that like timing game a little bit, but it's just harder to predict. You might see a young prospect coming up, and it's just as difficult in baseball. So I don't really want to say it that way, but you have some inkling that, Jason Dominguez has some various stats. You think, oh, this guy might be it. He's coming up with New York because all these reasons. You might not necessarily be able to predict that this random wrestler in the independents is going to go on to become the biggest wrestler in the world. Trying to figure that out is tricky. So you can still do it, though. I mean, there's people that are looking at right now. Grayson Waller is having a little bit of a moment. He's a guy that was in NXT, which is kind of like the minor leagues of the WWE. He's come up and he's been doing this like talk show thing. He just had his first actual main roster match against Edge, a legend, a Hall of Famer. They're obviously going to start trying to figure out how to push him. So there's a chance that if he clicks, you could start to make some money off him. Austin Theory was a guy a couple years ago that was kind of his cards, his rookie cards were starting to sell for a lot of money. His 2020 Topps Finest, for instance, like that's his rookie card. That actually has the RC logo on there. Those cards were selling for a lot of money, but right now he is one of the most bland, boring acts going, and fans are just not interested in him. So that could be a miss, just like a Zion Williamson or whatever, Although Zion Williamson still has more story to go, we'll see. And so does Austin Theory, right? So there are a lot of similarities there. And if you can be shrewd and start to figure out a little bit of like who's getting a push and who's not, you can try to figure out how to make money.
Yeah, no, and that segued into my next question, which you already answered, because I was wondering if there was such a thing as prospecting in wrestling as it is in other sports, and you kind of really touched upon that. And something that made me think while you're sharing about prospecting in wrestling is, it's true that in prospecting in sports, obviously you look at their stats and you see how well they do. But with wrestling, it's almost like predicting what the storyline might be, right?
Yep.
And but then at the same time, it's hard to gauge how fans receive that storyline. Is that really the issue in terms of prospecting in wrestling?
Yeah, I mean, dude, that is absolutely, I mean, good luck figuring out exactly what the fans are going to like, right? Because it doesn't matter. You can push a guy to be unbeatable. You can push a guy to win every single title and he never loses the title. And this is true. I mean, this happened with Roman Reigns before when he was doing the head of the table bit. Or I'm sorry, I forget what it was called now, but when he was first getting his first babyface push, he was unbeatable. He was the guy, but the fans were just booing him out of every arena. They did not accept him. It just didn't work, right? And now he's turned into this heel character where he is the head of the bloodline, head of the table, and he is now the hottest act that's going. And all of a sudden he's finally blowing up. So, but I will also make the parallel. This is kind of true everywhere though, right? Because you can look at stats, you can look at all these different things. But, why isn't Freddie Freeman more popular amongst the hobby, right? Point. I mean, he's going to go to the Hall of Fame. I mean, maybe it's not, the book's not done written yet, but he's one of the best hitters in baseball and nobody really cares, right? Mookie Betts has it. I mean, don't get me wrong. Mookie Betts has a market, but it's not what you might expect it to be when you really go back and look like, I mean, this guy was maybe second to Mike Trout for however many years. I mean, he's, true. I mean, the guy's won 2 World Series, won an MVP, he's done all these things, and yet his market still isn't what you might expect it to be. And it still comes down to when it's all said and done, how the fans respond to you long term anyway. In sports, and stick and ball sports, you definitely get a lot more of the hype machines. You don't see that the same in wrestling. You don't see. Again, going back to like Grayson Waller, you're not going to see the crazy spikes like we're going to see for, Wemby. I mean, good luck getting a Wemby card and good luck figuring out how well he's actually going to do. I think he's going to do well. Yeah. I think he's going to struggle for a couple of years. Prices come down. That's probably the time to buy him. I don't know. I don't think you're necessarily going to see those types of fluctuations because of that level of hype in wrestling, which in my opinion is a good thing. I mean, there definitely are fluctuations. There definitely, people get hyped up and, if you decided to buy like Liv Morgan last year when she finally won the title, it's probably not the best time to collect Liv Morgan cards. You're probably happier to buy them now or a year before that, right? So,
no, I appreciate that insight and very helpful. Just speaking to you for the last half hour. So Shane, thank you for that. And what we like to do with all our guests is just I'm going to ask you some rapid fire questions if you don't mind.
Let's do it.
And then we'll just end off the interview that way. All right. I always ask this first. What's your favorite PC card at the moment and why?
Okay. So, man, this is such an impossible question to answer, but this has kind of become my default. So, in the first Prism set that came out for wrestling, there's the white sparkle cards. And I was able to get my hands on a Bret Hart one. That's who I super collect. That card came in, and when the wrestling white sparkles came out, they were just notoriously off center, bad. I mean, so many of them, it was like laughable. Like, how are so many of these cards so way off center? So I got this one, and it looked just perfect. It looked great. And then I had a chance to meet Bret Hart about a couple months later, and I said, "This is the first time I'm ever going to meet Bret Hart. I'm going to do an autograph signing," and I decided to go with this card to get him to sign it. I stressed for days about the right pen. My wife's an artist, so she was helping me test a bunch. I destroyed I don't know how many cards. Like, how does this one look better? This one look better? And I drove 2 hours to meet him, stood in line with a buddy of mine, got to meet him, got to have a little laugh with him. He signed the card. I get back. I decide I don't care what happens. I just want to get it encapsulated. I send it off to PSA, and it got a 10-10. 10 for the card and 10 for the autograph. So amazing. The fact that I got a white sparkle that was actually centered and stressed about getting the autograph just right and both of them gemmed, that card stands out to me quite a bit.
Yeah, it's got to be. Okay, great answer. Do you have a Grail card or card that you're still chasing? And what is it?
Oh, man. I don't like putting this one out there too much. But the thing is, I actually know where it is. I know who has it. So the great curator actually has the 2021 Topps Transcendent Bret Hart Superfractor. He also had the 1 of 1, which I did buy off of him maybe like 4 months ago now. But he has the Superfractor. It's a little out of my budget.
Amazing.
That is a card that I would love, just love. I don't have a single Superfractor in my collection at all, and I've missed out on a couple of Brett opportunities. So that one would, that's probably the piece I'm most interested in adding one day. And he has said he would sell it to me, but we'll see.
Okay.
Maybe one day.
Okay. Well, maybe one day. All right. We talked about this card already. The 2022 WWE 1/1 Black Prism of The Rock, graded PSA 7, which I believe you mentioned, sold for $126,000 on PWCC. What did you think about that sale price? Were you surprised or
a little surprised? Yeah, I was definitely a little surprised. We have a very passionate community. And everyone was watching this thing like a hawk, because this was going to be a pretty big telling point about where the market stood. We all expected it to sell for a lot of money. I don't know that 125 was what any of us would have predicted. I was really expecting, I don't know, like I'm trying to think back now because it surpassed it so quick, but like 40, 50, 60,000. It blew that out the window. And
it sure did.
And there's also, I'll touch on this briefly real quick, but there's a big sort of split between vintage wrestling collectors and modern wrestling collectors. And it was kind of like a galvanizing moment. It's like, look at this modern card, just set the highest record of all time. So it was a surprise to see it go for that much, but it was also very exciting. Obviously it's a card I'll never own. It's probably a card I'll never even see with my own eyes. But to see that there is that level of interest in the modern space, it was awesome.
Yeah, it certainly was impressive. I didn't think it would hit six figures, but blew that expectation out of the water too. A couple more. There's always an ongoing debate in basketball who the GOAT is. Obviously between Michael Jordan and LeBron. Is there a similar equivalent in the wrestling world? Like I would maybe think Hulk Hogan versus The Rock, but I don't know. Is that right, or is there someone I'm not considering?
Well, I think you're definitely missing Stone Cold.
Okay.
Steve Austin is absolutely in that argument.
Yeah.
A lot of people will make the argument for Ric Flair, but I actually did I'm forgetting how long ago now. I did on my socials a whole bracket tournament, or is it like a Royal Rumble style, to determine who the greatest wrestler of all time was and trying to get many votes. And in that, obviously, I ran it, so it's the most official thing out there. Stone Cold won.
Wow, okay.
But if you ask me, so there is a debate, and I say it's Hogan. For me, wrestling doesn't exist where it is without what he did in the 80s. And then it doesn't exist where it is in the now for what he did in the late 90s with the NWO. He basically revolutionized the industry twice. I don't know what else a guy can do to be the GOAT. Austin absolutely took what Hogan started in the late 90s and ran with it, and the Attitude Era was basically him and The Rock, but I think Austin is a little bit above The Rock. So for me, it's Hogan, but there's debate. John Cena's in that conversation. People are starting to talk about Roman Reigns being in that conversation. He's setting records, which, in the wrestling world is a little, they can choose who sets the records, but nonetheless, so there's definitely people that are in the conversation outside of The Rock and Hogan, but The Rock is still by far the most transcendent. His popularity outside of wrestling is why his card set the record.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, no, that's good to know. And lastly, if you listen to our podcast, which I know you do, with these guest interviews in this rapid fire, we always end off with a more Canadian-centric question because we are three Canadians running this pod. But it's a no-brainer what I'm going to ask you. You're a fan of one of our beloved Canadian wrestlers who's been inducted into Canada's Walk of Fame. His name, of course, is Bret the Hitman Hart, born in Calgary, Alberta. What is it about Bret Hart you like as a wrestler? Just curious why you are a super fan.
So it's funny. Like now as, a middle-aged man, I look back on his career and it is hard to overstate just how good he was in the ring. He called himself the greatest technical wrestler ever. And as a kid, I didn't really know what that meant, right? But as an adult, you can go back and watch his stuff, the way he sells, the way he carries a match, the way he calls a match, because that's what will happen in wrestling a lot, is there'll usually be a guy who's calling the match in the ring and setting the story. And I mean, he was a storyteller just really unlike anybody else. I truly believe that when it comes to straight technical ability, there are people as good as Bret. There's nobody better than Bret. There's people who did it differently. You know, he wasn't a high spot. What you hear the term a lot. He wasn't a spot monkey. You know, so he's not doing these crazy flips. And I'm not knocking that stuff at all. I think it's awesome. So his technical ability and the way that he constructed a match was just nobody did it better, even to this day, in my opinion. Now, as a kid, I think it was just the cool factor, man. The long, greasy hair, the glasses, the pink and black. I mean, who else was wearing pink and black with hearts on it? He'd go out and give the kids give the glasses to some kids. I always wished I was that kid, man. I just then he started rocking the leather jackets, and really, we could talk a lot about what Hogan did for the industry. We can talk about what Austin did for the industry. People sleep on how much impact Bret had on helping launch. He was the catalyst for the Attitude Era with some of his work shoot promos that he was cutting, and then it led to the screw job, and that's a whole different conversation. But I mean, I can go back and watch a Bret Hart match anytime and look at it and go, oh man, I didn't realize how well he did that. I mean, look at that. Just a simple bump there. And it's like the way he's selling that is better than anything we see on TV today. So that's my guy.
Well, appreciate the Canadian love there. And thanks, Shane, for your time. I plugged your Instagram and Instagram Threads socials, but I know you're part of other things in the hobby content world. Do you want to plug anything upcoming or any of the shows you're on?
Yeah, sure. So you can definitely check me out. The podcast that I run is somebody just called it recently like an audio diary of my time through the hobby. I think that's a good way to put it. But yeah, that's a Sports Card Nobody podcast. Yeah, at Sports Card Nobody. You can find me on all my socials. And really the big thing is coming up at the National. If anybody's going to be at the National, if you're a wrestling fan in any form or fashion, come check out the main event. You can just email Chicago Main Event 2023 at gmail.com. We'll get you on that invite list. There's going to be giveaways. It's going to be such a great atmosphere. Come out and check that out. And it's going to be a good time.
All right. Yeah, everyone go meet Shane if you're in Chicago for the National. All right. Thanks, Shane. We'll talk soon.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Clark.
Hey, thanks for listening to Cards to the Moon. We'd really appreciate you subscribing to our podcast wherever you listen to your podcasts. And you can also connect with each of us on Instagram at 5cardguys, or you can follow Hyung at Integrity Sports Cards, or John at TradeU at Recess. You can also check us out at 5cardguys.com. Thanks again, and hope to connect soon.